The Redefined podcast is part of the Winmate Give podcast network.
This dude's got a story, and it is a wicked good one. Gang, this is the Redefined podcast. My name is Eric Hatch, and Aaron Amuchastegui is joining us. Man, the first time I met you, Aaron, I was a bit blown aback. Not because I was starstruck. I know you're like this superstar and a big deal, and that was awesome. But like, you have this amazing story of being so in the depths to the top of the mountain, back to the depths, back to the top of the mountain. Like, you are not that boring train that goes around the amusement park. You are the freaking roller coaster that people scream when they see it. Dude, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. I'm glad and you know that my biggest defect is my ego. And so I love it. You know that it's a really easy way to get to me when you hype me up and tell everybody how amazing I am. Man, that like does all the right things to make me want to just give you whatever you want on here. But I had so much fun meeting you. Had you on my podcast. We had some great conversations. Realized we had a whole bunch of mutual friends, and even over the past few years, we've been in the same rooms together.
Yeah.
Without even meeting. So I'm glad that it was divine when we finally got to meet.
Yeah. Well, gang, you need to understand, we met each other on a private island in the British Virgin Islands. Our mutual friend, Aaron West, pulled us all together for what they call like a friend vacation type thing. And we got to dive in and work on our marriages and work on connecting as friends. We didn't really talk much business, but man, I was drawn to you. I think because your wife is way more awesome than you. Yep. And she is just an unbelievable light. So Kalina, shout out to you and the joy that you bring the world. But I was drawn to you because you were like super down to earth. Of course, it's so fun to see that we were in all these different rooms and had these different connections, but like I felt connected to you in like a non-intimate sort of way. Does that sound fancy?
Yeah, that sounds accurate. I mean, having the British Virgin Islands backdrop probably helped. And you definitely also controlled the room. Your karaoke skills are next to none.
Thank you.
And I was just super impressed all around. So it's a big love session today, listeners, as Eric and I are just glad to be able to talk to each other again. And then I got to meet one of your business partners in person just a couple weeks ago.
Oh, who was that?
The buddy that does sell a home.
Oh, you met Nick Shivers. Yeah.
I finally met Nick in person.
Oh my gosh, we've had Nick on our podcast too, and he is one of the most fantastically weird, beautiful, amazing human beings. This guy has a heart to serve like no other, and I'm glad you got to meet Shivers because he's an incredible man.
Yeah, him and his son were in Austin.
I love it. Yeah, they were down for Mega Camp, right?
Yep.
Okay. So Aaron, it's important that you tell our audience, and I'm going to give you like a chance to brag. Don't pull any punches. Don't hold anything back. Tell us why you have hit the top of the mountains. What are some things that you've done? What are some accolades that are unbelievable? Because I think what you've done is pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I've hit top of mountains several times, Eric, and then I came crashing down several times. And what's crazy is we can learn through success, but for whatever reason, I learned the most from failure, mostly epic failure. And so like
you don't stumble. You like, garage sale it on a ski hill. Everything goes everywhere.
I don't do anything small, man, on the good side and on the bad side. And so like at a high school, it's like voted most likely to succeed and all these positive things. And then 2 years later, I'm getting arrested for armed bank robbery. And then I go spend a couple years in prison in my early 20s. Like that's a story inside itself that there's plenty of podcasts that talk about it. And then like I come out of there with like a chip on my shoulder, realizing I lost a couple years of my prime life. So I'm going to go back to college. I'm going to try to be better than everybody. I graduate at the height of the housing boom in construction management. So then I'm heavily recruited. I get this great job. And so then fresh out of college at 25, I'm making six figures, running a home building company. I'm golfing 2 days a week. So at that point, so now it's like I feel like I couldn't get any better. This like unrealistic expectation of what life's going to be. And then a few years later, market crashes. They lay off 75 people. There's like 5 of us left. So then it's like, all right, that's like my second reset of going from having a stay-at-home wife and making lots of money to Kalina started having to work nights as a waitress. 2009, we're super broke. our second daughter's born 6 weeks early in the NICU. And I have this moment where it's time for me to finally jump out as an entrepreneur to start my own business. That's when I discovered courthouse step foreclosures out in California. I was the first person to do it at scale in the Sacramento area. It was a great big opportunity that we kind of was self-discovered. When I first went to auction, there was only 2 other guys there, and like hundreds of houses were selling, and they were all, and none of them had a business background that I had. So I was the first to build it at scale. The next few years, flipped 1,000 houses, had raised this big private equity fund, delivered millions of dollars in profit, made millions of dollars. So then like 2012, I feel like I'm on top of the world. Blackstone says they're coming out. They talked to me, interviewing me about maybe helping go work for them. And I remember being too young and too cocky to think maybe I should Google who Blackstone is. They said if I didn't work with them, they were going to put me out of business. I didn't believe that. And they did. So then 2013, I went from making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to by the end of the year being heavily in debt. So that was like my third rise and third fall. And I learned so much stuff during that time. I spent the next couple of years just scrambling and praying and somehow paying my mortgage every month. And I remember in 2015, applying to be an Uber driver, applying to be a City of Napa building inspector. And it was kind of, by that time I had like accepted the lessons I was supposed to learn. I really knew why. And I knew that I would have my big opportunity again someday. And I remember this mantra that was always like, if I ever get a second chance, I'm going to do it so different next time. And in 2015, long story short, I ended up standing at an auction in foreclosure auction in Texas for a specific property. I got cold feet when that property came up, and I was distraught, and I didn't have the money to even fly there. And I couldn't believe that I had gone. And while I'm standing there, this auctioneer sells like 50 houses behind me and nobody's standing there. And I was like, oh my God, this is like 2009 all over again. My mantra would be, if I ever got a second chance, I would do everything different. So then from 2015 to now, I've had this meteoric rise. And so when you're like, why are you awesome? What works? Well, all these things that I learned during the 2009 to 2012 on how to flip, I learned all sorts of things. Right. And then when Blackstone put me out of business, I learned all sorts of bigger strategies that were like a 10x versus 2x type strategy of how to look at things different, how to make money different, how to know when there was the opportunity. And so when I got my third once in a lifetime opportunity, which everybody will, like everybody out there should come across a few, once in a lifetime opportunities. And I knew the more recent times, like to spot them, to go all in. Because the first times I had it, I didn't always go all in, or I didn't have enough financing, or I didn't really know what to focus on. And so it was all these life lessons along the way of, success, but then truly failure. Because when you fail, you go, what went wrong? How did they do that? Oh, if I would have realized it was a big land play and they were going to buy everything on the market just to push values up, then maybe I would have realized, they had a good business plan. But I thought they were just trying to buy rentals, whichever it was. So it's been a wild ride, man. And and I learned a lot during that time, and I'm just super grateful where I am today.
You said so much, so casually, so fast. Yeah. I have 1,000 questions about where you've been, the high highs, the low lows. What mental state are you in today? As we record this, it's the end of September 2023. The market has changed and shifted a lot. What mental state do we find you in today?
Yeah, business has been better, right? So I've been here before, right? So there's a little bit of there's this balance of like disappointment and distraught from the business changing, and this other part of like confidence and knowing like the next big thing's right around the corner. And I've survived down markets many times, and it's so much about flipping and pivoting. It's funny, when I came out to, and the real estate market's different everywhere. And so one of these things that I really came to recently, you talk about mental state, but I guess, and it's transitioning to this like state of like hope and trying to rediscover who I am. Because when I first came to Texas, the biggest reason I did is there was hundreds of people now at California auctions bidding on 3 houses. And so I flew to Texas where nobody was doing the business. And it was like, cool. So my business plan works somewhere else. And in Austin today, where most of my stuff is, we've got 5 or 6 months of inventory in real estate. I've got a house that's been listed for 60 days that hasn't had a single showing yet, and it's priced 50,000 below the nearest comps. Like, what can you do in that case when you're at like 6-7 months of inventory? That means it might take 6 months to get an offer, even if you're priced right. So that sucks. But I started realizing like but there are great markets right now that are performing well, that are 1 or 2 months of inventory, like Sacramento, California, or Phoenix, Arizona, or Las Vegas, Nevada. And so I'm rethinking about like what I did before when I was hungry, when I was willing to like fly out to Texas to kind of do the thing before. Like maybe it's that reality that even though I live in Texas now, that there's some big opportunities somewhere else. And so it's being able to say, where can I pivot to? Because there's this balance of going like, hey, we're in a slow period right now, Eric. Like we're in a slow period. And one option is you just sit back and don't screw anything up because this period will change. And that's a valid thing. And that's mostly where my mind's at. Cool. I've had a good run for a few years. Now it's a very calm run. Let's just hang out. But the other side says, is that kind of giving up? Is there a place that I can actually fly to once a month like I used to, buy some houses and keep the business going? And so a lot of different emotions in there from trying to make sure that if I sit back and do nothing right now, that it's actually a smart thing and by choice, and it's not because I'm giving up.
I like that. Let's rewind the clock back. You're 17, 18 years old. You said you were voted most likely to succeed in high school. Why? What kind of kid were you?
It's funny, man. I was a 4.0 student. My mom was like a vice principal, or she was like superintendent, I think, by the time she was like big in
education. You grew up in Oregon, right?
I grew up in Klamath Falls, Oregon, small town, like 17,000 people, something like that. So small town, my parents were well known. My older sister went to school. So like all the teachers knew me. Everybody knew me. They all knew my parents. When they met me, they were like, oh, because you're Tim and Cease's kid, you're amazing. We already know you're amazing. Right. And so on one sense, half my life was that guy that was like the 4.0 student that did sports, that behaved really, really well. But I also had these issues with the fact that somebody would judge me without actually knowing me. And the kids with like good grades that like come from a good family that lives on top of the hill also get made fun of a lot by the other kids, and it's not really a good feeling. And so I had these two lives I wanted to live. When people would say like, oh, we know you're a good kid because you're Tim and Cease's son, I also had this thing where I had to be somebody else too. I didn't like being judged on those first appearances. So that got me into like, starting to smoke weed. And like, I remember the first time somebody like saw me smoking weed at a party, they're like, oh my God, Aaron, I would have never expected that to be you. And they thought it was like so cool because I was such a good kid. Well, that with my ego defect was like, all right, I like that I'm getting known for something else here. And then I started like selling weed, like bags of weed to people. And that made me extra popular and made me feel like, oh, I was getting all this sort of attention. So I lived two very different lives. This life where everything on paper looked really, really good, but in secret, I didn't really like that. I don't know why. It's hard to explain of why, like, I wanted to also be a rebel. Right. And so I had those two lives. And so that's why at school, it looked like everything was going to go really good. But on the side, I was still making a lot of decisions that I shouldn't have been.
I can relate so much to that, Aaron. I grew up as a goody two shoes, brown nosing, good church kid. And when I hit college, I was like, well, that's the label that the world gave me. And I was like, who am I going to be? Yeah. And so I never got into drugs, but man, I would be drunk at class if I ever even went. And I was like, how far could I push the limits of being stupid with liquor simply because I didn't believe that the label that the world had given me was the label that I was going to wear. As you were searching for labels for you, obviously you went down a path that landed you in federal prison. What label did you believe you were? Who did you say you were when you looked at yourself in the mirror that got you to prison?
So funny, man. Like the cliche, you can blame like rap music and partying with this idea of like, I don't know, as me and my buddies were becoming more and more rebels. We're small town, so we think we're hardcore. We think we're like, these really crazy kids. And compared to like real life, we're not.
Were you sporting a wallet chain, Aaron?
Oh yeah, dude, the wallet chain, the rap music, the doing all the things. And like the long story short of the bank, right? And we had guns, but like in some sense, it's like in this small town, like people going and shooting guns at targets and backyards wasn't illegal, wasn't that big of a deal. A small town Oregon, people used to have the guns in their like the rifle in the rack in their truck, right. So my buddy, like the long story short of how that thing happened, we had been like selling drugs to support our own drug habit because we like to party, all these things. And a buddy of mine owed me money and I kept giving him a hard time about it for that ego thing. Probably like, I'd like to say in front of people like, oh, the money you owe me. And he got fed up one day and was like, here, I know how I'm going to get you your money back. And essentially he's like, we'll go rob this bank. You'll drive me. We'll do this. As we're driving there, like, and most normal people would say, haha, whatever, like, let's go back to doing nothing. But as we're driving there, Eric, it was really weird. I didn't think that was a good idea. I didn't want to do that. But I also didn't want to tell him that I wasn't as hardcore as I've been acting like forever. And the same thing was for him. So on the way there, he's hoping that I'm going to say, Pat, you don't have to do this. Let's go back to the house. Let's go smoke a bowl and like go back to like being normal, like whatever. And so I'm hoping he's going to say, I can't do this. So neither of us wanted to do it. Neither of us wanted to chicken out. So it's like this epic game of chicken. I remember when he got in the car and he said, drive. And he had a bunch of cash in his hand. He goes, I forgot the bag. And I said, wait, you did it? Like the moment he got in my car, I was surprised. Like I was.
So
shocked.
you weren't even in the bank. You were the getaway driver.
I was the getaway driver, but like he thought essentially, I didn't think he was going to do it. He didn't really think I was going to, encourage him to do it. And we turned ourselves in the next day. It was, it could have been worse. There was a lot of things that helped me only have to go to prison for 2 years when it should have been.
Was this in your hometown that you robbed the bank?
It was in my hometown. Yeah.
In your town of 17,000 people. Had you not turned yourself in, would you have been caught?
Likely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we weren't smart criminals. We just thought we were,
Well, I don't know many 19-year-olds that don't have the ego to think that they're never going to get caught, but also aren't very smart, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So like, so during that time, like, who was I? I do know for sure that I remember the day that I was like kind of checking into prison. And I was like, wow, how did this happen? Now, the year leading up to me actually turning myself in, man, it was like finding God again and finding all these different things. Like I went in with a really, really good mindset of like, I just want to get this thing behind me now. I'm ready for the rest of my life. I'm not going to be a partier. I was a changed person, and I haven't drank any alcohol or seen drugs or anything since then. Right. I was 20 years old. Right.
So it was about a year before you actually landed in prison, between when you turned yourself in and when you actually went behind bars.
It's just the way the federal system works. A lot, like you get to turn yourself in because they have a lot of things they have to do ahead of time and put you in the right places. And so I was definitely a changed person. And I remember going in there and just going, how did this happen? I remember that first Christmas at 21 years old in there also going like, I cannot believe I'm spending the prime time of my life, like New Year's Eve when I'm 21 years old, right? Going the things I should be doing instead, and I'm doing here. And that's where it really created this, like, I am not going to take life for granted anymore. I am not going to take my future for granted anymore. I'm going to be grateful that I'm only getting a 2-year reprieve when it could have been longer.
What'd your buddy get?
5 or 6.
Okay.
Which still wasn't as bad as some of the people that we met, but it was, but it really changed the course of my life, Eric, for like, that's where my work ethic comes from now, the making up for lost time, the realizing too, that like God has bigger plans for me. Like I have way more potential than I was letting play out. And so needing to always, live to the full potential, almost as a responsibility, right? Like not everybody has great potential. Frankly, not everybody has amazing things they could be doing. Some people, a lot of people have reached their peak, and whether they are an employee for someone or whether they're a mid-sized business or they're an entrepreneur, wherever it is, a lot of people reach their maximum capability, and it's different than what you or me can do. And I think we have a response, like God has chosen some people to be able to do more. And I feel like we have a responsibility to be more when we're blessed with bigger opportunity. And that was one of the mindsets that came out of there.
I love the idea that you recognize that you were anointed and that God has some really special things for you, but you were in a place in which everybody is, this is an assumption. I've never been to prison. I've never been to jail, but everybody is not worthy of even being out on the streets, right? There has to be assumptively there has to be this mindset of people that is like negative, stinking thinking, I'm not good enough, I'm not going to make it. Is my assumption correct in prison?
Yeah, it's a, and it was, I was a minority for the first time in my life too, and I was, and what you see is there's probably like 80% of the people in there believe that that's where they're going to be forever. They're still committing crimes in there, still gang behavior in there. They're still doing things like some people get themselves in more trouble there than, they're going to go for 2 years, they end up staying for 5 or 10. Like, so there's a mindset of a lot of people that were like, this is just who I am. Like, I'm not going to let the system change me. And then there was probably 10 or 20% of the people that were like, I'm going to get out of here. I'm never coming back. Like, I'm a changed person. There were probably like 20% of the people that were like me, at least in the belief that they were in there, that was like, I can't believe I came here. They're learning to get their GED, or they're taking college classes, or they're dreaming about who they're going to be when they get out. And so, but there's like 80% of the people aren't dreaming about who they're going to be when they get out. Yeah.
Did you guys find each other then? Was it like, I always imagine, and I was listening to a podcast recently where a guy was in prison, and he talked about how he was a police officer that was in prison, right? He had done some things and landed him there. And he was like, he was the outcast of everyone. He's like, it was the darkest of the dark, but he talked about how at each table it's similar to Shawshank, right? You're with your group of people. Were you with your group of people? Was there a couple tables of like the hopefuls and and the dreamers of what's going to be?
Is really interesting. So you find your people, you find your niche, and you found like the guys that I became the closest friends with were ones that really had big dreams of what they wanted to do later. Some of the guys I still talk to all the time. My son Brax is named after one of the guys that I met in there. I was the GED teacher. And what was really interesting about being the GED teacher was a lot of my students were these like really heavy Los Angeles, like hardcore gang members, that were in there to get their GED. And of the like 30 or 40 people in my class at any given time, 1 or 2 of them are like, I don't want to be in here. I'm in here because they told me I need to be. But most of them were actually like, they wanted to learn the stuff because they wanted to get their GED, because they wanted to go to take college classes next. Right? Like they were hopeful and they were excited. So by getting the role of being a teacher in there, I got to stay around the hopefuls. And it was really interesting to see guys in their 20s and 30s, like excited about learning to be able to get their GED because they wanted a future instead. That they recognize that like what got them there isn't going to be sustainable, for longer periods of times. And so, yeah, the people that are, the people that want to have a good future, they hang together, they stay together, they meet each other. And yeah, you find your people for sure.
Did prison break you ever?
No, man, I was too young to act. So there was some crazy stuff that happened. I got really lucky. Though, because my GED students were also these giant.
So they were protecting you, I bet.
They're protecting me. Anytime anything went wrong, everybody knew they couldn't mess with Aaron, because of my students would tell them that. And so it was so again, like God, I got really, really lucky in that. So definitely didn't break me. I didn't have these moments where it was like, and I was almost like so young and from this small town that because nothing really serious happened. Like when the race riots happened and I had like some buddies get really hurt, didn't happen to me because nothing major like that really happened to me. I witnessed some crazy stuff, but I didn't have it happen to me.
How about emotionally though? Like, were you in a place that was super dark at times, or were you immediately, because you had cleaned your life up previous, were you optimistic and hopeful as you went through?
I was optimistic and hopeful the whole time. But what broke me was when I got in trouble before that. So by the time I got there, I had this really hopeful attitude. And you also numb some of the emotions. I did a pretty good job at segmenting stuff. So I probably really got to feel the emotions once I got out. It is strange to go a couple years without hugging somebody.
Yeah.
Like there's just little things that you go like, oh, there's like little things, but no, what I say is that's where I grew up. That's where I learned to like wash dishes. That's where I learned to have self-control. That's where I learned to like make good decisions. That's where I learned to have goals and drive again. And so it really like, that's where I became a man. I got to see whole lot of stuff there. And there was way more good impact than bad. And I'm of the unique people again, because it was such a short period of time, because I had relatively lucky, things happen in the right place, the right time, that for me, it helped set me off for the future. And not everybody has the same outcome.
There's some fascinating undertones to all this, Aaron, in terms of you were in a place that that could feel hopeless and frustrating. And I know there's a lot of business people that are in that kind of emotional state right now.
Yeah.
And yet you found hope, yet you found a tribe, and you found a way to push through. And that's a continued narrative through your entire story. What's fascinating to me is that your high school class voted you most likely to succeed, and you were also the one that probably failed the most.
Yeah.
Is that just because you take huge swings?
I had a counselor once tell me, like, all my traits would be great if I could just turn the volume down to like 90%. And what he meant was, like, Aaron, you have to be the best at everything, whether it's being the best student or being the best drug dealer or being the best, like, partier or could drink the most alcohol or whatever. It was just like, hey, if you can turn the volume down to 90% of that, you'll be really, really successful with that. And I remember telling another one of my friends, probably after the second time I went broke.
But that's, I want to pause there for just a moment. That is so countercultural, because we are in a hustle and grind culture right now that says, like, you gotta work harder than everybody else. And yet you have somebody that's telling you, dude, turn it down to 90 instead of 100. What a fascinating contrarian argument.
It was fascinating. And it really did help me. It helped me say, like, all my defects are actually my strengths when used properly. Like, I have severe, like, ADD and some other things that, like, a lot of the most successful entrepreneurs do. And when you use it for strength, when you use, like, the manic stuff for strength, it can really, really work out, really, really well, so when you get to use the stuff the right way. But I do take big swings. I told a buddy, I was talking to a buddy once, he went to college and he got a job at PG&E, and he's worked there for the last 15, 20 years, and he gets a raise every year, and he's moving up in the company. And there were years when I was making millions, and then years when I was making none, and years when I was making millions, and years when I was making none. And so there were times when he was jealous of me, then times when he wasn't. And he said, Aaron, I guess you have a bigger appetite for risk than I do. And it was a very, like, well said thing of, like, so do I take big swings? Like, for him, he was like, hey, I'll take the stability so I don't hit that bottom. But Aaron, you have a big appetite for risk, so you take these big swings. Because there's ways I could have taken risk without taking as much risk. I could have kept a normal job and flipped houses on the side. Right? Like, that would be less risky. I would have less swings in that. But so my lows have been low, but my highs have been even higher. And I wouldn't want it any other way.
Did your propensity for risk taking, did it mute itself a little bit when Kalina came into your life?
For a while, yeah. I remember, it's a great question. When she first got into my life and I'm going to college, I remember I wanted to start my own business so badly. Right. And then I graduated and I was like, I know I have this opportunity to go work for this home builder, but there's this land development. I think I can get a lender. I think I can do this land development. I think I can do it all myself. And she's like, no, we do not. Like, her dad was a cop. Her mom was a teacher. We do not do risky stuff. You do not become an entrepreneur. Like, my dad was an entrepreneur, so I saw the rise and falls, but she wasn't. And she said, no, you take that job. You take that job that comes with the health insurance, and we go through the motions that way. And that's who she was. And that was like, okay, so then no risk was going to be taken. And I kept wanting more. Anytime I would go to a restaurant, I'd be doing the math of, does it make money? Every time I'm going anywhere, I'm doing the math. But it wasn't until our second daughter was born early, because I discovered this new business, but I was still working for the other people at the time. And at that time, part of why our daughter was born early is Kalina was pregnant, working as a waitress from like 10 at night to 4 in the morning at a smoke-filled casino. And so it wasn't until that moment, I think, when she became okay with more risk, because I think in both of our minds, we had done everything we were supposed to do. I went to college. I got a job. She was working nights. We had our kid. We were doing everything we were supposed to be doing without taking the big risks, and it wasn't paying off. Essentially, our second daughter was still born early. We were working super hard. We were worried about her life. blaming myself for that idea of if Kalina hadn't been working nights, it wouldn't have, our daughter would have been healthier type thing. And so she didn't become okay with risk taking until we had tested the waters enough that she realized like just doing what you're supposed to do doesn't always pay off like it's supposed to. But there were several years that we would have been riskier. And then at the same time, even now having kids, I went to prison when I was 20. That's easy if you don't have a wife and kids at home. There's a lot of swings but the times I've gone broke and I did have a wife and kids at the time, that hurt way more than when I went broke before, because it was this idea that there are more responsibilities. So it does dull the risk taking. I have tuned it. Maybe I've turned it down to like 80 or 85% instead of 90 now.
Which may be a sweet spot.
Yeah.
I wrote this down as just getting by feels like losing.
Yeah.
Does that feel accurate in your story?
Yeah. The just getting by feels like losing for sure. It's like the keeping up with everybody else. I'll never forget the feelings when we were like, we are doing everything right. And I had a good paying job and some other stuff, but everybody that we were hanging out with in Santa Barbara had way more money, way more things. They weren't stressed about the things that we were, whether it's maybe they came from wealthier families and we were comparing the wrong things, but there were so many times where we were like, we are doing everything that they told us we're supposed to be doing. And we are just getting by, and it feels like we're losing, and life was supposed to be more than this.
That feeling of losing by staying the same or not progressing, not taking risks, that is not in everybody. I think everybody wants the success that you've had, but there is just a rare few that are willing to take the risks. Yeah. Starting with robbing a bank and selling drugs, right? Like you were just willing to risk it all because you wanted to feel and achieve and accomplish and be 100% all in. I want to transcend the story here a little bit, Aaron, because you pushed through. Your daughter was born. She was in the NICU as well. I want to know, in your life, when you saw your family's health struggle, right? Seeing a kid in the NICU or dealing with complications of your daughter or your son, anything like that, that immediately sends you into a new level of emotions. So what was going on in your life in 2009 internally in your head when you saw the health of your daughter was at stake?
Yeah. And what's even crazier is even 18 months ago when my oldest daughter got really sick and we had that battle for a while, but I think even back in 2009, it helped prepare us for that. But, looking at having kids, it's the strangest feeling the moment that you see them, like this love happens, this little thing of going, I need to take care of this child, right? They're not capable of doing it themselves. They're not capable of this without me. I need them. And if I'm not the one for them, they've got nobody, right? And so seeing the baby, seeing Charlotte, I mean, that's why I say I know for sure I started my business in September of 2009, because that was the moment when I was staring at her saying, all right, enough is enough. Because feeling helpless while she's on an oxygen tube and not knowing if she's going to be okay. And then also going, is this my fault? Really, I wasn't saying, is this my fault? I was saying, this is my fault.
Really?
Right. Yeah.
Why were you blaming yourself?
Because if I had provided more for my family at the time, my wife wouldn't have had to be a waitress at night. I could have just as easily taken 2 jobs instead of her taking a night job and me taking a day job. Right. Or maybe I would have encouraged a different one, or figuring out, we were just doing the best we can. But had I left that company sooner or started my business, whichever it was, but it really felt like had I provided better, had I made better decisions, Kalina wouldn't have been having to, be a waitress on her feet while she was pregnant in the middle of the night.
Do you still believe that story?
That's a good question. It's the way I've always told it. It's the way I've always told it. And the emotion was there. And I've never gone back to say, like, is that a lie I was telling myself or not? It was meant to happen. Like, that profound moment of me telling myself that was another one of those 5 or 6 moments in your life that I remember forever that changed the ultimate trajectory. So I would say I do still believe it, Eric, just because I've been riding on that one for a long time. And I've also learned that like, it doesn't really, the why behind stuff doesn't really, is it true? Was that true? Doesn't really matter if it does, if it serves the purpose, I guess. Like if I learned the lesson, if it put me on the path, like in hindsight, like we were both doing the best we can.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like her working nights, me working days, we were just trying to survive. And really, maybe there was no other option. As I become a dad, I've loved my dad more and appreciated him. He passed away too young, but I remember early on, like thinking, God, when I'm a parent, I'm going to do this, this, and this better. And then you come to this realization of like, oh, they were just doing the best they can.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody is just doing the best they can, it's hard to fault them for it.
Yeah.
It's hard, and it's hard to beat. So if I can forgive others and say, hey, they were just doing the best they can, I should definitely be able to forgive myself and go, hey, I was just doing the best I could.
So as an outsider to this story, Aaron, I don't think that you're the reason why your daughter ended up in the NICU. I just think shit happens sometimes, man. There's the age-old saying that everything happens for a reason, right? And I've always thought that is just a complete and total crock, because I don't think that God manifests and maneuvers all these things so that we can learn lessons. I think that we learn the lessons when the things happen. But you were doing the best you could with what you knew at that time, and I don't think that it was your action or inaction that led to that. And I hope and I pray that you don't, like, that served as such a great catalyst and an accelerator for your life. So talk about the value coming from it, but I don't think it was your action or inaction that led to your daughter being in the NICU for 6 weeks. I just, that doesn't add up from where I sit. And yet the gift you've been given now of the gift of perspective and doing the best you could with what you had, like that's a fun place to be. But if you're holding any kind of guilt whatsoever, and I'm not sure you are, but if you're holding any kind of guilt, man, that's not for you to carry anymore.
Yeah. That's that old pastor in you that still comes out.
I can't shake it. Yeah.
You can't shake it.
I can't shake it.
Yeah. I've got an interesting story because of like all the like the financial and business struggles that people are having. I want to share a quick story that I think will help people. That's totally different, but just I'll share it for just a couple minutes, and then I'll hand you back the reins for wherever you want to take it. I remember it's kind of like when bad things happen for you when you can learn the lesson. So I shared the story of Blackstone came and put me out of business. And when that happened, I remember thinking like they came and told me, come work for us. We're going to do a rental fund, all this stuff. And I tried to analyze it the way that I thought they would. And I said, oh, these aren't even good rentals, or the return wouldn't be very good. But what I didn't know was their plan was going to be find an undervalued market, buy every property on the market. Yes, they're going to rent them, but really it's a long-term land play. And if they buy everything on MLS and everything that's scheduled for auction and everything in a certain zip code for the next 2 years, prices are going to get thrown just through the roof because people still need regular houses to buy. And that was the play that I didn't see. And then they did these giant cash out refinances because they bought the houses for $300,000, and then the prices got pushed up to $450,000, and they did a $400,000 refi. And I was like, whoa, so that's the business plan. Mm-hmm. So for years I got to stew over that and then putting me out of business that way, and why I couldn't foresee that. But part of it happening to you is, so January 2021, I remember, the market had started to slow down a little bit because the end of 2020 was really, really hot. It was just on fire. And when January hit, people started to go like, whoa, prices have just gone up like 30%. It can't keep going. I bet we're going to crash now. And so that month of January, everything had kind of slowed back down. Prices had come back down. Stuff couldn't sell. But me and my business partner had said, hey, we think that prices have a long way to go. Some of the kind of that Blackstone analysis, part of the, hey, there's a new person elected that we know is going to put a bunch of money, a bunch of stimulus that we think is going to boost home prices and inflation and all this stuff. And I remember texting my real estate agent in January 2021. And I said, we need to buy $40 million in real estate in the next 60 days. Like, send me everything on the MLS built 1985 and newer, and we're going to buy it all for list prices. And it was through lenders and hard money and all sorts of things. But it essentially was that Blackstone model. And we did that in January 2021. We tied up everything, especially these new home neighborhoods. And like, this fascinating thing that happened was like 9 months later, we'd buy a bunch of duplexes. We'd tie them up for like 260, and 9 months later, but when the construction was done, they were appraising at 400,000, and we were able to do cash out refis the day we bought them. The reason I share that story really quickly is because right now, people's businesses are changing for the most part in a lot of areas. I mean, no matter where you are, there's some markets where stuff is selling fast and prices are up, but everybody's volume is down. There isn't a mortgage broker out there making more money today than they were 2 years ago. There isn't an agent doing, well, maybe there is, but their volume is just down, right? And so look around for the lessons right now. If you are in one of those spots as a listener and your business, like look around for the lessons of the things that are working, and something that can bring you hope is it might not be like today or next year or 2 years from now that lesson is going to help take you to the next level. But the getting to see firsthand the company strategy that put me out of business and took me to zero and took me to a severe debt that brought me from making $200,000 a month to like being in debt to go be an Uber driver, getting to see their business firsthand and like learn in that failure. 10 years later, I guess it was like 8 years later, that what I learned from them, I got to go do at the same level, and it more than made up for, the loss from before. So it's easy to get discouraged in tough times, but I would say the best thing people can do in tough times is try to look around and learn as much as you can, because the moment will happen where this lesson will pay off more than you've lost today.
Yeah, that's good. What are you learning right now as you look around?
Oh, I'm trying to figure out, what am I learning? I'm trying to figure out if I've become weak or too comfortable. So I've talked about like ready to go, maybe I'm going to go launch in these other markets and stuff. But I have a lot of rentals. But I also do really, really well. I'm not doing as well as I did a couple of years ago, but I'm doing better than a lot of people. Right. And I know that, and I don't take that for granted. But if I was broke today and I was facing this market, I would be very active. I would be on a plane tomorrow. I'd be driving houses. I would be door knocking. Like it's almost like good enough it can prevent people from actually like thriving. And when a bad time happens, it's really easy to go like, okay, I'm just going to be good enough. And so I'm trying to figure out like, am I weak now or not? Because I know, if I was broke, I'd be flying to Phoenix tomorrow to go to auction. I'd be flying to Vegas tomorrow to go to auction. Every day I'd be flying somewhere new, trying to figure out where my new niche and my new market's going to be. And because I have rentals and I have enough, I think sometimes that prevents me from realizing like there is a business and there is a way to actually thrive in this market and do better than I ever had before. Like down markets, there are niches out there that are waiting to be discovered.
Yeah.
So that's part of what I'm learning. Like I'm trying to remind myself, like if you were broke today, you would be going harder at this. So if I want to complain that my income's down 75%, maybe I need to tell myself like, yeah, but if you were broke and you needed to pay the bills, like you would go do this instead, and maybe it would replace the income that I've missed.
Because I don't know which one is right, Aaron. Are you, because you're comfortable even operating on 25% income? If you're comfortable, does that just make you patient, or does that make you foolish for not jumping on the next plane to Phoenix?
That's the question. I don't know the answer either. Like that's what I'm at, because I do know that my biggest opportunity, like I generated most of my wealth in probably 3 different 1-year periods, right? Maybe 3 different 6-month periods. There's very short periods of time. And then part of me says the key to life is just don't screw up in between and wait for your next moment. So maybe my next moment 6 years from now, maybe for the next 6 years, I just need to make sure I don't screw something up and lose it all. So that's like the be patient and wait for the next moment and then go all in. So there's that mindset that is real and could be true. But then there's also the idea of maybe that next moment is right now. I just have to go find it. So I don't know the right answer either. I think that but that is the lesson that I'm trying to mull over right now. Like, which should I do? Should I be trying to go force something, or should I sit back? Because people can get themselves in a lot of trouble by trying to force a play, and being able to define the difference between trying to force a business or discover something great is tough.
Well, pain is a really big accelerator, and the moments in your life when you were in the most pain is when you went and jumped. And I just as an outsider looking in, your why is still there. Your driver is still there, but that also comes at a cost. And we haven't really talked about that cost. When you went from California to Austin, and you were on the courtroom steps, and you saw the opportunity that showed itself in 2015 in Austin, how much time were you away from your family? What kind of mental state were you in? Was your family getting just a little bit of you, or were you a really focused, balanced dad and husband?
Yeah. When you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to another, right? Like you can be a businessman and a family man, but your family relationship will never be as good as it could be, or your business relationship will never be as big as it could be. I know people don't really like it when I say that, but it's like, but when you say yes to one thing, there's no, and you can have a balance where both are pretty good. But if you're going to like become a billionaire and grow $1 billion company, likely your family is going to struggle. And if you're going to have a perfect family life, your income is probably going to be average. I'm sure there's exceptions, but that's how I've seen it. You have to say yes to one. If you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to another. During that time, it was desperate times, so it made it a little bit easier. We were in the foxhole together, but I would fly out to Texas. I would stay out in Texas for a week. I would drive houses. I would go to auction. I would buy them. I would change the locks. I'd meet with contractors, and then I would fly back. So every month I'd spend a week in Texas, and then I'd come back and I'd get to hang out with family and do stuff. But that was a challenging time, traveling so much, going back and forth. And the mindset back then was like desperation, because it was like, well, we just need to do this. And then the more we were able to like start to buy houses again, then we got to start actually doing family things again. So when I came back, we were able to go on vacations, and we had some really, really good years during that time. It was probably almost like the best balanced time, because even though I was gone for a week every month, but when it comes to sacrifice and the great idea, like you have to ask people, like, would you have done that too? A lot of people are like, so I discovered Texas at the right time, but I also took the action to like fly out there every single month and spend a week out there every month, living in the Shiloh Inn, with a rental car, and like going all over the place. And, so we took the action at the time. It was a big sacrifice. I find it actually tougher to balance today as the businesses and the families and everything has gotten bigger. So I'm definitely there's been times when I had a great balance. There's been times when it's been way more skewed for family. Like 2017, we spent like 3 weeks a month, like traveling together as a family. And I'd spend 1 week working. So my family life was profound during that time, and my business kept going. It didn't grow, but it was like good enough. And then we've had times. So our family life has been kind of seasonal, where you realize like when these opportunities happen, there's going to be some times when I focus more on the business than I do on family. But then in the in-between time, you're supposed to focus more on family than you do on business. I'll continue to be fighting that battle my whole life. It is the most difficult balance I've come across. And I've had times where I was very proud of it, and I liked the way that it worked. But I also don't think, for listeners, I don't think there's a right or wrong way either. It's just realizing like, when you say yes to one thing, you're going to be saying no to another. And sometimes it's about communication. Like Colleen and I will talk about things where I'll say, hey, this next 6 months, I've got this really, really big opportunity here. Or I'll say like, I probably only have 2 or 3 years left to like actually make a 9-figure company that I could exit. Like I've only got like 2 or 3 more chances to like do this one thing I'm hoping to do. And so we'd have to focus on that now. But it took the work. It took the family sacrifice. Everything that we've built takes the family sacrifice. And if people think that you can have both equally, I think that's just a lie. I think people just need to know that they're the trade-off that they're taking with all their decisions.
I love your understanding of that there's a season for everything, and that you can't be great with your family and great with your business. You can be good with both, but I don't know about you, but good feels pretty mediocre. Even scripture tells us when something's lukewarm, you spit it out. And so what's a learned lesson that you've used in framing things with your wife, right? With Kalina, you're able to say, hey, the next 6 months is going to be really intense. Is she just understand now that that's par for the course, that Aaron's going to have his moments and times in which he dives all in? Or is it met with like, you have these responsibilities here at home and you need to make sure that you continue to honor that?
No, I would say she is the ideal entrepreneur's wife, because most of the time she's very like, okay, it's one of those seasons and we can do it as long as I communicate it properly. But the caveat of where I've failed many times in the past too is the caveat of that is like, yes, you can dive way more into your business and the family can be second for this season and she'll step up on the family. But when I do have my free time, I need to be giving it to the family.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I've screwed it up at different times too, of going like, no, so it's in one of those seasons, but like they're okay to be on the back burner, but they don't want to be third or fourth on the list.
Mm-hmm. I've learned this as a capital T truth, is that an entrepreneur is only as good as their partner is at home. And I love that you found somebody great with Kalina. I found somebody great with Emily. I didn't even tell you. Emily is now she stepped away from teaching, so she's all in on supporting the family and being her best self and helping me to continue to grow. So it's such a fun season for us to move into, and I got a lot to learn from you and Kalina.
Congrats, man. I remember when Kalina used to be my broker when we flipped houses. And I remember when I tried to get her to get her license in Texas. And she said, no, I'm not going to go back to work for you. I am going to take care of the family and I'm going to support you and you're going to grow your business. And I remember saying, we can't afford for you to do that. But she was the one that was right, because by her taking the balance to support the family so I could go focus on the business grew 10 times. Instead of me thinking like, oh, we have this income plus we need your commission income. She was right in the sense that if she could take care of the rest, that I could grow the businesses bigger than they were ever going to get.
Wow, that's pretty awesome, man. Aaron Amuchastegui, your last name is so hard to say, but it feels so good to be in my heart. I'm really grateful for our friendship and grateful for the lessons that you learned. I'm walking out of here today feeling like, and I got a little pep in my step, because you're inspiring me to take bigger swings. And you're inspiring me to find those opportunities, because we are ripe with them when we want to go get them. People, if you want to follow Aaron, find him on Instagram, Aaron Amuchastegui. It's so hard to say. You should have a last name like Hatch. It's much easier.
Hatch is much easier. But, you know, if you go on Instagram, guys, it's Aaron. It's Aaron. If you type in Amuch, it'll fill it in after that. You won't have to know how to spell it. So just think Aaron Amuch, and then you'll find me. Or I've got a link out there. It's meet-Aaron. So meet-Aaron.com. And you join one of my free webinars or some of my other stuff. But come talk to me on Instagram. I love chatting with people on there. And if there was a question you have or something that I might have inspired you with, like, I'd love to hear from you.
Man, Mooch, so good to be with you. Folks, again, follow him. And if you would do me a favor, I want you to take this episode and I want you to share it with somebody who maybe needs that call and that urge and that push to take some bigger swings like my man Aaron does. So on behalf of all the people at the Redefined podcast, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on the Flippity Flip. Be well, everybody.